And this Hangout on Air is live. Wow, really? We're live? Oh, and there's Matt Waldman. Mr. Matt Waldman, who I believe when I mentioned the Cavaliers last week said, whatever.
And that's true.
And now you
But
get
that's
a
for
chance.
Jared. That's for Jared
It is
Plotz.
for Jared. It is for Jared to mentor, and it's a great place to start. We love Jared. He's truly, there's love. There's love in both directions. And for Jared, for all of Cleveland, congratulations. And it's great. Some titles in the Great Lakes region, the hard-working blue-collar steel and industrial region. Now we need to get a peer. What do we have left now, right? The Detroit Lions need to win a title and the Chicago Cubs, right? Anything else?
Browns need to win a title.
Well, yeah. I'm talking about things that are actually possible. Now, welcome everybody. Welcome to Thursday Night Show. Cecil is actually on vacation, and I hope that all of you over the next few weeks. I'm going to be on vacation in early July. The NFL traditionally goes on vacation. Beat writers go on vacation for those first couple of weeks of July because we know that once training camp starts, we're underwater. We love it. We love being underwater with each other and going all the way through the season with Dr. Gene Bramwell, with Matt Waldman. That's right, swim. Dr. Gene, welcome back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. Thanks for carrying on without me last week.
You're an Ohio guy, Cleveland.
Yes.
What do you think?
I think it was exciting. I like a good story, and I think LeBron was a good story. Not that the Warriors wouldn't have been a good story as well, but coming back from 3-1, LeBron doing what he did, Cleveland finally getting the championship, I like the story.
The prodigal son returning home. And now, Matt, as a Clevelander, did you feel something stir inside of you this week?
I was never a huge Cavaliers fan, so I don't want to say that I was, but I did like the little tribute to Jim Brown from LeBron James, and he certainly, as an Ohio guy, getting a chance to go back and make things right in a sense, it's definitely a very cool thing. So I know a lot of my family really enjoyed that and went to go watch the games and be a part of all of that. So I'm happy for them. It's a very cool moment for Cleveland.
There was a great photo, I think it was on the cover of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, of LeBron in the car, like surrounded by people, and I think the quote from him was, "I'm nothing without this city." And it really is great, and we see the symbiotic relationship between football teams and cities too. And I think all of us, except for Dr. Gene, of course, who is very clinical and does not have a favorite team, and emotionally, that he was getting emotional about the Cavs just then. I don't know if anybody, that's Dr. Gene getting emotional. But for most of us, there's some sort of emotional pull into the game. And then we get into the analysis and things. We'll get into some analysis tonight. We got Dr. Gene back, so we do have some things to go over. Really great article. And we have to say, Dr. Gene, we have to say the name Craig Zumsteg more.
Yes.
Really great article from him. I'm gonna jump in and we're gonna do that article. Before we do that, I'm gonna give you our first sponsor of the night. And this first sponsor, we'll mix it up. The 2016 Football Guys Players Championship. Drafts are already going on. Kicked off June 5th. And there'll be drafts through the start of the NFL season, September 8th. Right now, through June 30th, got about another week, next week from Tuesday, you will receive a free 1-year subscription to Football Guys Insider Pro, $34.95 value, with a team that you purchase for $350 in the Football Guys Players Championship. You get a 3-pack of teams, $1,000, you save $50. You get a 3-year subscription if you're a current subscriber. You get those years added on. Of course, those of you know, Football Guys Players Championship, gold standard in high-stakes contest, $250,000 grand prize, $1.8 million in total prizes, championship round prizes down to 650th place, league prizes $1,500 for first place, $500 for second, cap it at 6,900 teams, all prizes guaranteed in escrow, ultimate prize protection. Football Guys, you know that we are going to guarantee this. Drafts will run through September 8th, and if you are a little gun-shy about drafting early, just know that this year they've added 2 waiver wire runs on September 2nd and 7th, so you can rectify anything that has changed between now and then. Things are going to change between now and then. And one of those things that will change, Gene, I mean, it will change in the sense that either Thomas Rawls is going to move down the board even further, or maybe he'll stabilize again at that 3rd round value he had before we started to worry. Craig Zumsteg and you collaborated on an article basically asking the question. This is the new Gene Bramwell style. Ask the question, answer the question. Did Thomas Rawls have ankle surgery? And what did you discover? And as we get closer here, how are we focusing on Rawls? Because I don't see Rawls as a question of do you take him in the third round or fourth round or fifth round. I see Rawls as a question of do you take him or do you not take him. The round doesn't even really matter.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I don't know if we discovered anything, and I think as we got to the end of May and Pete Carroll was saying that the Seahawks were hopeful that Rawls would be back for week 1, that sort of set the spidey senses off a little bit more. And right after the injury, when you looked at it on tape, it seemed like it was kind of a high ankle situation, and then when they come out and say ankle fracture and ligament tear, your brain automatically goes to surgery. So it was a little bit unusual when Brock Yord, I think that's his name, one of the Yord fellas, for ESPN said that there was no surgery involved. And not only did he say, he definitely said there was no surgery involved, he also said that there weren't going to be plates and screws and so forth, but really strongly said that there wasn't surgery involved. And maybe it was just a kind of a misspeak within the tweet, but that was enough to maybe make you think, well, maybe it's not as big a deal. Maybe it wasn't such a severe injury that needed surgical fixation. But as we get into March and April, and we hear that he's just been cleared to run recently, and then in May, and then again in early June, Pete Carroll saying what he said, I think it was pretty clear, even if the Seahawks and Rawls himself really hadn't confirmed that there was a surgical procedure, there really isn't any non-operative ankle rehab that takes 6 to 9 months to recover from. So there's almost certainly some sort of surgical procedure there, and whether it was related to the high ankle type mechanism that we saw on film, or whether, as others, including Dr. David Chow, has suggested, maybe there was a little bit of a dislocation there that involved the fracture and the dislocation. Those things can sometimes take a little bit longer to recover from. So I think we're hearing good things. From March on, we're hearing that he's been allowed to run. Rawls has been pretty optimistic himself, saying, I don't think there's any question at all. I'm going to be ready at some point in camp, and certainly for week 1. And you can take the Seahawks drafting of 3 running backs and adding a fullback in undrafted free agency as really hedging against Rawls, or just the fact that they needed some depth with Marshawn Lynch likely to retire. They weren't in a huge hurry to bring back Kristen Michael. I mean, they weren't so nervous about what was going on where they felt like that they absolutely had to give him an RFA tender, but they did go ahead and sign him back just 10 days later at a cheaper rate. So it's a little bit difficult to interpret what's going on, but I think clearly there's more than what we expected to have heard, back in December and January when there wasn't any surgical tweets going on, surgical indications of through tweets or otherwise going on. So I think we're probably not likely to get any more information until training camp starts, and whether he starts camp on PUP or not, whether we get a little bit of an interview with him before the end of July. I think that's going to be our next little bit of information. But yeah, I think our spidey senses all along were kind of suggesting that he had surgery, and that's one that, and you look at it on hindsight, it definitely seems a lot more likely that he did than he didn't.
Gene, let's check in with Rashad Perriman. What's going on there? Anything new? And what do we need to remind fantasy owners of his situation?
I think the default expectation when you have any sort of ACL sprain, and a torn ACL is just a high-grade sprain. It's a complete tear, and it's one of those things where it's not something that's allowed to heal because of the way the ligament is, because of the size of the ligament, because of how vital it is to the stability of the knee. Those things get repaired, but we have to remember that the difference between a grade 1 and a grade 3 is 95% of the ligament. A grade 2 is more than just some tearing of fibers, all the way up to just short of a full tear. So while most players with a partial ACL sprain or a partial ACL tear usually need surgery because it's an unstable situation, there are a small handful of players who have a small tear in the ACL whose knee isn't unstable on exam, and apparently when Dr. James Andrews went in to do the arthroscopic surgery and pulled on it with the probe, felt like it was stable as well. And those players are allowed to rehab knowing that the ligament will scar down and eventually heal. Now, we've seen players return as quick as 6 to 8 weeks after that. Sometimes it takes a good bit longer. I think Perriman's I think it's likely both because he was a little bit of a slow healer with the PCL injury last year that eventually required surgery. I think the Ravens are going to give him a lot more time to recover than just those 6 to 8 weeks. So I think it's probably tough to see him back until sometime in camp. But I don't know that we need to jump to conclusions, as even I was wanting to do, that a partial ACL injury means surgery. Could it still progress to surgery? Absolutely. But I don't know that we need to expect that that's the case right now. Hopefully the knee stays stable. Hopefully the knee rehabs well, and we see him back pretty quickly.
And weren't we saying something similar about Rashad Perriman last year, Gene?
Yeah, and then there were setbacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what we have to be worried about as we go through camp. Not only does that ligament have to heal, and he's already, I mean, it's two different situations, and maybe there were some other issues during the rehab last year, and PCLs are a little bit different than ACLs in that regard. We talked a little bit about that on the couch in the past, but I think that. The hope is that this ligament heals much better than the others, but that's why I'm saying I think the Ravens are going to be super cautious with this because even though the setback required PCL surgery last time, if there's a setback with this ACL, it's a 9-month injury. It's the end of the year as well. So when we're talking about, I think you can make an argument that there's nothing to lose by allowing him to try to rehab with the stem cell injection if it's close. Because the worst case scenario in 2 months is what the worst case scenario is now. If he were to have ACL surgery now in June, it's almost impossible that you'd see him get back for this regular season. So why not try to rehab it if it's a borderline situation? Dr. James Andrews is really into stem cells. He feels like they've been effective, and they've been effective in some of his patients before. We saw Kiko Alonso do a very similar thing with James Andrews last year and come back and play in 8 weeks, not necessarily effectively, but he returned to the field in the same season. So I think that's what we're looking at here. I don't think there's any way to say with certainty that Perriman is going to be ready for week 1, week 4, week 8, depending on how long it takes to rehab, but they're going to give him a chance to come back this year.
I would highly recommend, too, that if you haven't, go read Matt Harmon's reception perception on Kamar Aiken if you're thinking about the Ravens wide receivers right now.
Steady Kamar. Darren McFadden was steady, but not so much now. Gene, broken elbow, going for that cell phone. Don't want that screen to break. At least that's the story. Some interesting ins and outs here where Alfred Morris becomes a little more interesting. McFadden isn't ready to start the season. Darius Jackson, I think a spark freak they got in the 7th round. Is that right? Darius, was that right, Matt? You made a face when I said that. I want to make sure I didn't miss.
Eastern Washington, you got it.
Eastern Washington. So what about McFadden's elbow based on what we know on this injury? Between the two of us, there'll be something to correct if we talk long enough. What do we think about McFadden in this elbow injury? Because it takes away a possibility of him maybe being on the trade market if another running back went down, and otherwise, it affects looking at the depth chart behind Ezekiel Elliott.
I don't know if we know very specifically where around the elbow the injury was. I mean, elbow could mean the upper arm bone. Elbow could mean one of the smaller bones as it comes into the elbow from the forearm. It could be as simple as a small little avulsion fracture, a chip fracture. It could be something more than that. All of those things would tend to require surgery, and the rehab estimate we're getting is 8 weeks. And we've seen lots of players with forearm fractures take longer than that, 8 to 10 weeks or longer. So the hope is that it's one of those minor fractures, just a quick little pin job. He recovers quickly. And it's not. If there's a nice thing about it, it's not a lower leg situation. So it would be a situation where he'd be likely to be able to play with pain a little bit easier with the upper body than the lower body. But there's ball security issues. There's range of motion issues catching the ball out of the backfield. I think 8 weeks is, again, as so often is the case, an optimistic expectation, especially when we're talking about Dallas. So I think you'd work under the expectation that it's going to be a 2-month injury, but not be surprised if it tends to be more in the, the 12 to 16 week range by the time it's all said and done.
Gene, do we have any reason to be concerned about Maurkice Pouncey and all the surgeries that he's had during his career, at least what we've reviewed this week?
Well, when you said, what did they say, 7 surgeries, including 8. A skin graft? Yeah, 7 and a skin graft, 8 overall. And it seems to, when you're talking skin graft, it's almost certainly because there's been skin breakdown and everything related to infection. And I think that's sort of the understanding of in the Pittsburgh media as well. And when you deal with that around the joint, not around the joint, you're thinking about scarring, you're thinking about tissue loss. So if it's around the joint, is there going to be some arthritis left over? If it's, depending on where those surgeries were, you expect maybe some muscle loss or otherwise. Everything that we're hearing recently seems to be very optimistic that he's participating in all the OTA practices and everything else. But there's definitely reason to be concerned that maybe some loss of strength, loss of range of motion, depending on particularly and specifically where the infection was. So definitely reason for concern there.
Gene, I want to. Sammy Watkins, there's the latest. He's hopes he's ready to be ready for training camp, but. We do this tango, and you're so good at it. You know this dance. You know all the steps so well, Gene. In August, of limited information, right? Oftentimes these players don't play in the preseason. We get some idea of participation in practices. We get some idea of optimism, but we're still going by limited information. So, tell me something that would make you or just, if he follows through, and if Sammy Watkins is practicing to open training camp, you're putting him back to where he was in your tiers and your rankings before he had this surgery, or is there even something? And otherwise, can we forget this with Sammy Watkins, or is his injury history extensive enough that even if he does practice that little bit of the creeps, knowing like, oh, Sammy Watkins just hasn't stayed healthy for very long at any point in his career, is there anything that can redeem that he can do this summer when we're deciding whether or not to draft him?
No, I think the sooner we see him back on the field, the sooner we see him get through that reconditioning side of things in those first couple of weeks where he comes back in full speed, the better you'll feel about him. And this is going to sound confusing, but we've seen many players, wide receivers in particular, recover from this injury and do well. But we've also seen a number of wide receivers, including Maurkice Wilson just this week, go back and have a revision procedure. We've seen Julio Jones do it. We've seen Devontae Parker do it. Lots and lots of these players have gone back at some point requiring a revision after either aggravating their injury, having a stress reaction, a screw failure, or lots and lots of other things going on. So he could have, at some point this season, at some point in the future, this is very possible that it will crop up on him again. I don't know what the percentage risk of that is. It's something that we probably ought to ask Craig to see if we get a short list of wide receivers who had this injury and find out how many of them have needed revision surgery. And you put Bryant and Julian Edelman in that category right now too. So it's a pretty common thing that happens. There's no guarantee it happens this year. So what I'm hoping to see is, you expect it to be, we always hear 6 to 8 weeks, but I think this is more of a 9 to 12 week injury. So you're looking at 3 months from the end of April, which puts you in the end of July. So I would expect him maybe to start camp on PUP, maybe not, but you'd like to see him get in the mix and do some practicing and maybe get into a preseason game to feel good about him. But I don't know that we're going to have a very strong feeling about Watkins until we get into the middle of August.
Ditto for Tyler Eifert.
Yeah, and my thing on Eifert is, we're going to get that 3 to 4 month expectation on him, but lots of players that have been through this have been more on the 4 to 6 week side of things. And as we talked about a few weeks ago, I think that's where you're seeing that little bit of a hedge in Adam Schefter's tweet, which is, they're expecting to be back in 3 months or so, but nobody's ruling out the possibility that he's going to miss a quote-unquote few weeks into the season. And again, that's that 4 to 6 month thing that we talked about with Cam Newton, that we've talked about with other players. And the critical part of this, the information that we're only going to get, not necessarily in hindsight, but after we see him fully return, is the rehab usually goes fairly smoothly, fairly standardly in the players that we've seen have this in the first 2 to 3 months. And those last weeks are, does he have the range of motion necessary? Does he have resolution of pain and stiffness in that area so that he can do everything he needs to do, so that he can plant and drive and turn and all the things that he needs to do to be able to protect himself in those last stages of rehab? And is that going to take a week or two? Is it going to take a month or two? I think it's impossible to predict until we actually get to that point. So, like so many of these other players, and he's got to get through the reconditioning phase. So, we hope that he doesn't end up with hamstrings, calves, groins, all those other things, what have you, as he tries to come back once he's fully cleared to go.
So lots of uncertainty. Actually, before I ask our final little injury item to Dr. Gene, I was going to turn this back on you, Matt, because I did my tight end tiers. I just put up my tight end tiers today, and maybe this is because I'm underestimating Greg Olsen, but I'm looking at my rankings, and it's obviously Gronk and then Reed. And it's still a lot of uncertainty, but I'm having trouble moving Eifert down from that number 3 spot, moving him behind Olsen, behind Kelsey. First of all, because I'm fine with just taking Martellus Bennett in the 11th or 12th round and starting him until Eifert is ready or looks good. But how do you handle that, this idea that we may not have Eifert for a few weeks, we may not feel comfortable starting him at first, but we know that without Marvin Jones, without Mohamed Sanu, he's basically the number 2 downfield target in this offense. We know he's the number 1 red zone target. How much have you moved him down, knowing that we don't know when we're going to see him and how effective he'll be at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, he's my 11th ranked tight end, so pretty far down. And I think the reasons have to do more than with his injury. I think that for me a little bit is, how much will conditioning issues play into the potential obstacles there? He already drops a lot of passes. I mean, his drop rate last year, I believe, was in the 7 to 8% range of all of his targets, which is one of the highest rates you'd see from a tight end. And I know he had one really bad game that might have upped that percentage some, but I think he's a really good but not great athlete. He's a good receiver but not a great receiver. I find him slightly overrated as a football player, and I think that the lack of a strong secondary target opposite AJ Green might actually hurt him a little bit. So I have concerns about that because not having Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu, that puts more pressure on Eifert to get open. It makes the zones a little bit tighter because I don't have a lot of trust in Brandon LaFell or Tyler Boyd just yet. I think that they're going to need a year to get acclimated. And then, the bind that they like to have was kind of a Boyd Bernard, or excuse me, a Green Bernard Eifert type of deal. But it did help that they had a couple other guys on the field that teams knew could get it done, knew the system, and you just wonder how much Ken Zampese is going to change anything here. And if he's truly influenced by Mike Martz, he might just ignore the Pro Bowl tight end, just like Mike Martz ignored any good tight end he had. Right. I don't think it's going to go that far. But there are a range of possibilities that do enough for me to say, to be cautious. He's probably more of a low-end tight end one for me, which means I'm not touching him right now in drafts at this stage of the game. Talk to me more as we start to see what he does with his recovery, and we start to see encouraging signs with him on the field running at full speed, cutting, whatever it is that he's going to do. And that gives me a better idea of whether I should bump him up some more, because I'm with you. I'd rather pick a guy like Martellus Bennett at this stage of the game and just wait later and know that I can get a better player at a different position where I would have normally drafted Eifert if he were healthy, or if I were an optimistic fan of what Eifert's going through right now.
Yeah, wide range of possibilities, absolutely. Gene, last one. Jamal Charles might not be ready, might not be cleared. I shouldn't say ready. Might not be cleared for training camp. Any worry as we add this to the picture for him?
Not yet. I don't think we've heard anything through the offseason that suggests that he's had any sort of rehab setback or otherwise. And although we had a discussion some time ago about Charkandrick West's role in this offense and whether or not the Chiefs are ready to allow Jamal Charles to continue the same volume and workload that he's seen in the past, I think the takeaway point from this is that it was a mid-October injury. Not every player, especially the skill position players, are going to be able to recover from this in 6 to 7 months. It should still be considered an 8 to 9 month injury. It won't be that way for everybody, but 9 months will kind of put you in that late July, early August range. They're going to want to make sure he's fully conditioned. There's no sense in putting him out there in harm's way in any meaningless preseason practices or games. He just needs to be in condition for week 1. So unless we see something very specific about a cascade type injury that he suffered at some point as he continues to rehab, or that there's been some sort of setback, I don't think I'd be too concerned about him for week 1 yet.
Speaking of week 1, our sponsor, FanDuel.com, will be there for you. Actually, not just week 1, preseason DFS. I know our esteemed friend Evan Silva is leading the charge on preseason DFS. Maybe we'll get into a little preseason DFS analysis on the Audible. I say analysis. Matt, Gene, did you ever think that we were really honestly going to be doing preseason fantasy analysis and it mattered? Ever?
It's kind of scary.
It is. But FanDuel.com's got you covered. Build a team. It's easy. Pick your players, stay under the cap, sit back, watch your team win. $1 entry fees starting out, or up to much higher, much bigger stakes. If you know fantasy, you can come and prove it at FanDuel.com. And Audible listeners offer for you a free Football Guys Insider Pro subscription with a $10 deposit if you are a new FanDuel user. Use our code FBGPod. Click on the microphone in the upper right-hand corner at FanDuel.com. Enter that code. Sign up now. You will get a free $34.95 value, 1 year Football Guys Insider Pro subscription. And if you already have one, we'll add a year on for you. Every week is a new season, even preseason weeks, at FanDuel.com.
Tyrell Williams and Darius Jackson away.
Yeah, no, Darius Jackson, like week 4, right? Like week 4 of the preseason. I want to see Brandon Wigger from Carolina. No, or who's the kid? What do we got? I've got a
second string by the end of this.
What about Rob Kelly? What about Rob Kelly from Washington?
Tulane. Yeah, that's right.
See, we're gonna do this, man. We're gonna corner the preseason DFS market. This is preseason DFS dovetails so well.
Kenneth Farrow out of San Diego, the running back from Houston. Yeah, that'll be
Ooh.
another one.
Yeah, no, I like this. I like this a lot
Right.
because RSP and preseason DFS dovetail so perfectly. It's like your whole life you've been waiting for somebody to ask you about, who's the guy from Buffalo? Like Blake Annan, is he going to be a good tight end start this week? He's fighting for a roster spot. Finally, all of all the depth and the incredible depth there is in the RSP preseason DFS, we found it. We found where the wheelhouse of it. Let's go into some other news items. Interesting. We go to Jacksonville, the running back, and Matt, I know this one probably hurt. Stabbeth at your heart. The idea that, hey, Chris Ivory, TJ Yeldon, we've seen one beat writer say Ivory could start over Yeldon. I saw another 53, a great series, by the way, at ESPN of 53-man roster projections with this commentary, because it just gives us an idea of what we know, what we don't know, what we're going to be watching, setting the scene. This is certainly something that's going to set the scene for us, because TJ Yeldon is going 2 rounds before Ivory, maybe 3 rounds sometimes, depending on the format. And that 53-man projection from ESPN said the first carry of the season could go to Ivory or Yeldon. We know they gave Ivory a lot of money. How are you approaching this situation, knowing, of course, that for Dynasty, you're still a Yeldon man?
Yeah, it hasn't changed for me because until an actual coach starts talking about what they're going to do, I'm not really, no offense to the beat writers out there, but I think that some of that is just their contention from what they saw, or something that would make a good story in terms of, the fact that it does seem up in the air. But, talking with someone who has been connected with that organization at one time, when I asked about that contract, their response was that, the money looks good, but really it's a prove-it deal for Ivory when you really look at it on the whole, and that this team really wants to be more of what the New England Patriots offense is, which is they can ram it down your throat one week and they can throw the ball and play on the edges the other week. And they also have continuity with those two players in terms of what they have available, even though they like Ivory's power a little bit more. So when I look at this, does it hurt Yeldon this year? I think realistically it does, enough that you're not looking at Yeldon as the guy taking the next step to be a high-end running back 2, low-end running back 1. But does it necessarily make him irrelevant as a fantasy option or not a decent flex play who can give you some strong weeks? I still think that's available for Yeldon. I think that Yeldon will continue to drop a little bit and become a decent value for you on a certain level, because I think that we want to say that the Jacksonville Jaguars defense is going to improve. We want to say that they're going to run the ball more and the offensive line's going to be better. But wanting to say it and actually being able to say it as a truth are two very different things at this stage. And I'm more inclined to say that this team's still going to be throwing the ball a lot in garbage time. Yeah. And that if anything, the passing game there is still a bargain, and I would be focusing on that.
Yeah, Gene, I was just going to ask you, do you have any inklings of going near the Jacksonville backfield? Let's say, Yeldon cost a 7th-round pick and Ivory cost a 9th-round pick. Either of those make you take a second look?
Maybe. I think you like the offense. I think you like the upside. What neither one of these guys has really shown is whether or not that they can sustain enough volume to be valuable over a long period of time in redraft leagues. So, it'd be nice to take a shot on one of them and see what you get. I don't know that I would invest that much in 2 of them back to back, but I think I would like Ivory a little bit better at that price than Yeldon, but it's a tough call.
Yeah, and it's funny, often we want them to make the step to be a winning team to help the backfield, but like Matt said, you think at the end of the day, by the way, nice shirt, Matt.
Thank you. A friend of mine got this for me.
Yeah, and a great. But we're not going to get a chance to say this is my son on the show anymore. So if you haven't seen the little 27-second clip from his interview that came out, just beautiful. Just he leaves us with gems, pearls, wisdom. Let's move on to a player, Matt, that was, by some accounts, the MVP of OTAs, and of course we don't put a lot of stock into that, but it puts players on our radar. The player is Devin Funchess. By all accounts, he was pretty dazzling in OTAs, and he's the kind of player who should, but that's what we're looking for. With his fluid movement skills, with his long frame, with his underrated speed, I think it's better than the time speed we saw. I think like 4.7. He runs faster than that. Kelvin Benjamin still, we need to see it. We need to see him out there. Funchess was starting to come on, and I would say, and you can disagree with me if you want, I would say at the end of the year last year, we saw him making a few of the kinds of plays that you would have looked for to say he's making the steps we want him to make. He's still going in the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th round, Matt. Is that something that, again, are you taking a closer look here? Is these reports and otherwise the arrow pointing up coming out of last year? It sounds like the arrow is still pointing up. Is that pointing to taking Funchess as part of our end game strategy?
Oh, absolutely is. I mean, I think if I'm correct, I need to look at my team because it's been a few weeks, but I believe I actually drafted him at that range in an MFL. Yeah, in the 10th round in an MFL 10 with Matt Harmon and Mike Clay at ESPN a few weeks ago. And when you look at Funchess, I mean, the big thing that I had concerns about when he was coming out of Michigan was he seemed to shy away from contact at times. He didn't seem to know what he needed to do, or it appeared that he didn't seem to make the right moves when it came to winning the ball. And he was a guy that had the size and the athletic ability to do so. So that concerned me a little bit. But he talked about playing injured and playing through an injury and not being quite himself. And sometimes you hear that as an excuse. It's the dog ate my homework excuse for a rookie coming into the league. That when those types of things are questioned about him. But when what we saw later on in the year, it very well may have been that the dog did eat his homework. So I'm more inclined to say that you look at Kelvin Benjamin, and certainly the beat writers are saying that he doesn't even look like he's hurt the way he's running around, so they feel pretty good about that. But the thing is Kelvin still drops a lot of footballs himself. And then you have a guy like Ted Ginn who has a 10% drop rate from last year, but Cam's okay with throwing the guys and continuing to throw when he has to. But if he can find a guy, in addition to Greg Olsen, who's a little bit more reliable catching the football, that's going to make him a guy that he's going to lean on a little bit more. So I like Funchess to have a good chance of doubling his totals this year, and if he does, he's a bargain in the 10th round, because I don't see how he isn't at least the wide receiver 2 or frequent wide receiver 3 in this lineup. And because of his size, it's not an automatic that Ted Ginn's going to be out there as the starter on the opposite side. It's probably going to be Funchess and Benjamin with some occasional doses of Ginn, just enough that he can drop a couple before he catches the big
right. Well, and they're still talking that Stephen Hill could figure in somehow. And then, of course, Philly Brown. And watch out for Demir Bird. They love that guy. Really another one of those training camp stars from last year.
South Carolina.
Yeah. They like him. So they've got some stuff brewing there. Gene, I'm going to kind of spring one on you. I should have asked you this in the injury segment, but it ties into a fantasy take. LeGarrette Blount. He left a game in mid-December on crutches, hip injury. Now, the last report that we saw during the season was that he avoided surgery. There was a report in late January that from Jeff Howe of the Boston Herald that he avoided surgery, but he was not able to work after they re-signed him. He was not able to work at all in the OTAs. It's somewhat similar to the Thomas Rawls situation, or at the very least, it requires more investigation. Now, this is a backfield that is still somewhat in flux. LeGarrette Blount, he's LeGarrette Blount role from the last 2 years. He's got value in fantasy leagues, but it sounds like perhaps the Patriots might be waiting to see how this goes. Mike Reese just this week in his 53-man roster projected article said this is one of the biggest storylines for the Patriots going into training camp. What can you add to the picture, or would you wish you knew, or what would you be looking for when camp opens and we're trying to figure out where Blount fits on our draft board?
I wish we knew specifically what the injury was, but more specifically whether or not there was a setback with this, or whether or not there was a different injury that's been involved as part of his rehab. And I think it's more likely to be just, the type of injury that he has. I think there's good reason to be worried that maybe there's a little bit of a break in the back of his hip socket there. We've seen that from time to time. We can see sometimes some labral injuries with those. Those labral injuries often get repaired surgically, so hopefully it wasn't such a big injury that was a problem. And as so often is the case with a lot of these New England players, that Bill Belichick and that team is not going to rush anybody back by any stretch quickly. So he's another player that the next bit of information is going to be whether or not he's healthy enough to start camp, or whether or not they're going to put him on the PUP list so that they leave all their options open. A lot of the reason we're going to be talking about this in July, lots and lots of players, some expected, some not expected, are going to be on the PUP list. Sometimes it's going to be a conditioning issue. Sometimes it's going to be due to a little bit more significant injury or setback than what we knew about. But teams do that so they keep their options open as long as possible. As soon as these guys come off the PUP or don't start on the PUP and take a training camp practice, they're not eligible for the in-season PUP list. It just really cuts back on the options for teams. And although the injured reserve rules have changed a little bit again this year, teams really like to leave their options open as long as possible. So it's not necessarily time to panic if Blount or some of these other players, Le'Veon Bell, Jamal Charles, lots and lots of these guys start the camp on PUP list. But that's really the next indication we're going to get with mini camps rapidly ending here now, whether or not these players, how close they are to actually being ready.
And Gene, I'm reminded of Sidney Rice. Remember that year that Sidney Rice had this nagging hip thing, and everyone's like, "Yeah, he's fine." I think even Drew Rosenhaus was like, "He's fine." And then in July, oh, by the way, he's going to have hip surgery.
Yeah. So are there labral issues? Is there a little bit of an impingement situation left over? We've talked about that with Brandon Marshall and lots of other guys over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. So that gains a little bit more popularity as far as getting surgically repaired. I think that's where we are. Is it, did he have a little bit more significant injury in the beginning? Is there something left over like that may still need to be fixed during the season? New England's just impossible to get any information out of. So, for Mike Reese to say this is a big story makes you think that the beginning of August is at least in question. Whether or not that proves true or not, we're going to have to wait and see.
And it was also Brandon LaFell last year, just all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, he's not going to play.
Jones, Dante Hightower, all of these guys have had hip issues that we don't really get a whole lot of information from. I don't think we found out on Jones for months that he actually had surgery for one of those posterior wall situations in his hip, and that may be what's going on with Blount too. He may be very Rawls-like, and maybe there was something that happened surgically that we just don't know about yet. So we'll see what happens in August.
Just a follow-up to that, is there a possibility that maybe I remember talking to a trainer who worked with a couple of professional teams that when there's a rash of injuries to the same body part, that there might be a gap in maybe the training program with a team. Now, it's probably more of a college-oriented thing than an NFL-oriented thing, because from what I've seen, it seems like that NFL teams are kind of like, you get in shape your own way, you do what you need to do. They're not going to be working 24/7 with you in the way that a college trainer knows you.
Yeah, I think that can definitely be the case. I think these teams are so, we've been talking about this for 3, 4, 5 years now, that when we talk about analytics, I think one of the areas that teams there's a lot more advances going on than what we know about are in terms of, functional movement, injury analytics, that sort of stuff, keeping preventative side of athletics. I don't know that I would put hip injuries in that category necessarily. You think of those as being more soft tissue things than anything else. It's kind of hard to put anything in your program to prevent broken bones short of not practicing in pads and contact. And I don't think we know for certain whether or not some of these issues are related in New England or not. But most of the things around the hip, whether they be labral issues or hip impingement or those sorts of things, I don't think there's anything necessarily in the program other than making sure that the players have good core muscle strength and are in decent enough shape to hopefully avoid any kind of injuries that might be going on there. So I think the answer to that question overall is yes, but I don't know it applies to the Patriots specifically here.
So, Matt, here's the follow-up. This is why I was saving it for the second segment here. In that same, I don't know if it was Reese's article or another article, but you just see the Arian Foster and the Patriots mentioned together so much. We've been doing this for long enough that in the off season, we can tell, like you were saying, Gene, if Mike Reese says this is a big storyline, he's trying to hint at something for us. Yeah. The number of writers that have said, the Patriots, I think they're going to sign another back. I think there's somebody that's not on the roster who's going to figure into this backfield. Arian Foster, the one of the 53-man roster, said, remember, Arian Foster is still out there. So Matt, let's say we hear tomorrow or we hear on July 29th or whatever, Arian Foster signs with the Patriots. What's your knee-jerk reaction, whether it's Blount, whether it's Lewis, whether it's none of the above? Because, hey, it's Arian Foster. He'll be hurt by week 3. Is it Foster that we're now excited about? Obviously, the fit would be good. It would make sense for him to want to play another year, to have a chance to play in a Super Bowl with them. What would be, from a fantasy standpoint, your first reaction if you read Arian Foster signs with the Patriots?
I would see a range in my head of players that they've signed in the past, and the bottom end of that range would be Kellen Winslow, which would basically mean useless, and maybe on the field, but you're really going to be like, I wish I didn't invest a lot in him. On the high end of that range, then you're looking at someone like Antoine Smith or Corey Dillon. I wouldn't say Corey Dillon, but more Antoine Smith, a guy that can give you starter running back production over a period of time. So it's really it's a pretty wide range right now in terms of what I'm looking at, but that signals to me proceed with caution, because I would still be more inclined to look at Dion Lewis as the guy that I'd want to hang my hat on there, even though there's still some caution with that ACL tear and how much he's going to get back.
Gene, I've got a good one for you. I'm going to tee this one up for you, okay? Did the Eagles do the right thing giving Fletcher Cox the biggest non-quarterback contract in the NFL?
Do the right thing? I think that's probably lots of layers to that one. I think Fletcher Cox is a good player. I think he's getting some, not as much as maybe an NFC East player would ordinarily, but I think people are generally recognize what a strong talent he is and how he's improved. And although he's normally you would think of, not so much anymore. I mean, Ndamukong Suh and some of these other defensive tackles have been getting some awfully big deals. You just wonder what Aaron Donald's going to get.
KK Short's up next.
Yeah,
Short up next.
And Aaron Donald, a couple of years after that. So, I think as you've said often over the offseason, the salary cap is such that you've got to pay players, and you've got to pay your best players. So is there somebody on the offensive side of the ball for the Eagles that's really going to warrant that sort of contract? Not necessarily. Who else on the defense? Vinny Curry got paid a little bit. They paid Brandon Graham last year. You like Michael Kendricks, and there's some other players on that defense that deserve to be paid, but nobody else other than Fletcher Cox. Is he worth what he got paid? I don't know. I think in Jim Schwartz's scheme, he's got the ability to be a really impact defender, and they can move him around, and they're still able to use him outside as far as 290, 300-pound guys go that can effectively edge rush from a 7 technique or even a wide 9 technique. I think Fletcher Cox would still fall into that category. So you're paying him as more than as an interior run defender or an interior defender, period. So I like the move. I don't think it's going to hurt them in the long run. I'm not a capologist necessarily to know whether or not I'd spend that much guaranteed money on Cox, but you could do a lot worse than Fletcher Cox for sure.
And I think that he's merited that kind of status at this point, as far as looking at the pay scale and him setting the standard. And I like that you brought up Jim Schwartz and the new role. And certainly for those of us who do play those hardcore IDP leagues where defensive tackle is broken out, I had to take a kick in the gut whenever Chandler Jones got moved from defensive end to linebacker. But if you have Fletcher Cox and he moves from defensive end to defensive tackle, you're looking good. You're looking good. I want to ask, Matt, you about a player, another MVP of OTAs kind of player. And it's interesting because this is a player that I think will stand for the principle that if you watch a player and you see things on his college tape, and then he does timed drills that appear that are slower than he played. In other words, you watch him, you have an idea in your head, this is how sudden this player is, this is how this player translates, and then the times put them down at the bottom. You throw out the times. You don't throw out the tape, you throw out the times. The player is Jameson Crowder. Matt, can Jameson Crowder matter in fantasy leagues this year?
He can. I think my thing for Jameson Crowder was this. I have something up on my blog about him from a couple of years ago where he's playing Texas A&M in the bowl game, and he's that player that what you see on tape was he was always this close to doing something special, but never completing it.
Sure.
He was, so if you looked at, one way you could look at it is, wow, if he just does just the teeniest bit different, he could be a difference maker.
Closer to like a Tyler Lockett type.
Yeah, I mean, I said more of a Steve Smith type. Like, to me, Steve Smith, and it's the same thing really when you're looking at it. I mean, not to say that anyone is really Steve Smith, but to say that they're in that class of little guy who plays a big game. And I think that that's really what you're talking about there, is that can he cross over to being little guy playing a big game, or is he still that little guy who just doesn't quite have that big game? And so for me, really the way of looking at this always comes down to how you ask a question and how you want it to answer it. And to me, as a fantasy owner, I can certainly understand that may happen, and it may be worth taking taking him as a selection because of that. But the other answer could be, do you give a guy a pass and say that he was this close so he could do it, but it just didn't apply yet, or do you say make him prove it? Make him prove it to me before I make the investment. At this late of a stage, he's probably worth the investment. But if he starts to climb higher on his buzz, I would then caution people against it, because he's still likely to be the number 3 receiver in this rotation after Reed and after Jackson, or if Doxson actually gets healthy enough to play. We've certainly seen some rookies who didn't do anything in training camp and turned out to be awesome, Odell Beckham, so it can happen. But I would look at this more than anything as, even Andre Roberts, I remember a guy I liked a lot, had some training camps after his first year where he started to look really good and people were excited about him, and he didn't really do much more than give you maybe top 25 production at the bottom half of the tail end of a season, and then didn't do much more. So for me, it's a prove it first, but I definitely see why people can get excited about him and why I've often seen him be like that close.
And another reason to like Washington's pass offense and the element he adds. But I just find him interesting as a guy that if they're not going to be a high volume pass offense, which is, if they were a 650 attempt pass offense, I could see Crowder getting 90 catches.
Well, if Matt Jones has troubles again, they might be forced to.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I'm going to give a word from our final sponsor of the night, Reality Sports Online. Brought to you today by Reality Sports Online, a powerful fantasy platform that lets you build and manage your fantasy team like a real-life GM. The platform features the revolutionary free agency auction room, has tons of other cool features like a rookie draft, franchise tags, automated contract and salary cap functionality, much, much more. Visit realitysportsonline.com today. Use the promo code AUDIBLE, 10% off. And I'll mention again that Matt Waldman started the RSP Writers League, going into its 4th year now. And I would say this, Matt, tell me if you would agree, the most adrenaline I have during any draft all year is during that auction. Because what do you get, like 11 seconds or 15 seconds to think about it when a new bid is made? So if you want that white knuckle draft experience, really putting you to the test, and these are decisions that stick with you for 3-4 years sometimes.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It really is. And I mean, you and I are in it. I think we got Harmon and Jason Wood. We got a lot of football guys. Bob Harris got some good vets around the league, around the industry, and it really is a fun way to play because of the fact that it has all those salary implications, and you can take a number of different strategies with how you build your team and manage it, and it's a wonderful experience.
So we will move on here. Gene, I want to keep you involved. I don't want your mind to wander too much. So I want to ask you. I want to talk a quick defense thing, and a larger picture here, because I saw a very interesting note. I think we're all 3 fans of Owa Odighizuwa here, and now with Olivier Vernon, with Jason Pierre-Paul getting accustomed to playing with his new hand. Talk that Odighizuwa is going to move inside. Oh, we're back to the NASCAR line, right?
Yep.
We're back to this. Not new. So do we like this fit, and do we like the possibility, because the Giants went on a real spending spree on defense? Could this be one of those defenses that does a 180?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like the idea. I think that they have been very aggressive in doing this in the past. Justin Tuck played this role. Diggy Zua has been compared to Justin Tuck in some ways in the past. I don't know if he's exactly that type of player. I would probably rather see him on the outside, but I don't think you move Pierre-Paul inside. I don't think Vernon's going to fit inside at all. So Diggy Zua probably has the best chance of doing that. You've got Jonathan Hankins there. Damon Harrison is a guy that's probably going to come off the field on sub-package downs. So I think it makes good sense that you put him there. I wonder what they're going to do with Devin Kennard. They've used him outside in the past. Maybe they do move another player inside and put Kennard out there with, one of the other guys to rush the passer. They've got a lot of players that can get after it. I don't think it's going to be as good as what it was with Pierre-Paul and those other guys in their prime, but I think it's worth paying attention to. I think any way to get him on the field because he sort of last year was a lost year in terms of developmental time, and we talk so often on the defensive side of the ball with those defensive linemen is they need to remake their bodies a little bit. They need to figure out a way. These are the most athletic offensive linemen they'll ever going to face. There's probably nobody in the college game that they faced that holds a candle to what they face on a snap-by-snap basis in the pros. So it takes a while for them to do that. We're going to see that with Joey Bosa this year. We've seen that with time after time after time, everybody. So I think this is a good way to give him one task, to allow him to work on some counter moves inside because it's not an edge rushing situation. I think it could be a good thing for him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the Giants, got Janoris Jenkins, like you mentioned, Damon Harrison. That's going to really firm up their run defense, leave a big hole in the middle of the Jets' run defense there. Moving right along, Matt, I want to ask you just a general question. We've talked about Carlos Hyde, but we haven't really talked much about the San Francisco offense otherwise. And there's a couple of players, Torrey Smith, all signs pointing to him as the number one wide receiver target. Not really much. And please, talk about Bruce Ellington as much as you want. But I also want to know your opinion about Vance McDonald. I think we've talked about McDonald a few times in the past. And this is a player, there's more buzz building, more momentum building. And it makes sense if you're thinking Blaine Gabbert pass offense. Who's the kind of player? And Vance McDonald did riff pretty well with Blaine Gabbert. We've talked about Carlos Hyde, and we've come to maybe not a conclusion, but at least laid out that range of possibilities. What about the rest of the San Francisco offense? Because while Chip Kelly isn't necessarily a name that is going to make people excited in Philadelphia, in fantasy terms, even with Sam Bradford making the offense not nearly as exciting, this has been an offense. Chip Kelly's offenses give us the larger pie. Even with substandard players at most skill positions, should we look at this offense as a source of other players, not just possibly Carlos Hyde, that can outperform their ADP?
I mean, I think there are certainly guys that can do that, and they're capable of it because of the fact that the San Francisco 49ers are probably going to be a lower-end version of the Jaguars in terms of situation. They're going to be playing from behind an awful lot, and they're going to have to throw the ball. So, the thing about McDonald that's nice is he's a good athlete, someone that has the ability to make plays with the ball over his head. He has enough speed that when he can get downfield and get open, a player like Gabbert can probably get the ball in his area to have him make plays. I thought Gabbert was particularly good on seam routes and on corner routes, and I think that McDonald is a good matchup for those types of routes. So that's a potentially a strong thing there. What you can find from McDonald, as long as he's shown the ability, like you said, to riff with his quarterback and make sure that they are on the same page with reading zone coverage and him not getting rerouted into traffic in a way that's going to be problematic for him. A guy that I've avoided, I kind of toyed with my buddy Steve Volk last week, admittedly, because we talked about the 49ers, and he's been in our ear a lot talking about what he's seen from Bruce Ellington's reports and OTAs and about how good he's looked and how he's jiving with Gabbert. And we all know that Ellington is a terrific athlete and a versatile player who can get deep but also make plays after the catch in the short game. And he's looking good right now. And I kind of resisted talking about him because I wanted to wait until I did at least some sort of article on him. But I think that Steve is right. I think that this is a guy that you probably want to look at because he can give you somewhat of what Cecil Shorts gave Gabbert when they were both playing well together, or at least when Shorts was playing well with Gabbert throwing him the football. And I think that you can see something maybe similar from Ellington, from the sense that a lot of the targets he's going to see are probably low percentage targets, or high percentage targets, excuse me, whereas Torrey Smith is probably going to have a bigger share of the low percentage targets. And as much as I like that Gabbert has a decent arm and he throws a pretty ball, it's still left to be seen whether or not that this offense is going to be able to give Gabbert time and Gabbert's going to be able to handle the pressure strong enough to consistently do it. I thought he looked better last year overall, and I wouldn't mind taking Gabbert as like as maybe the last pick in a draft if I felt like I was particularly weak at quarterback and I wanted to take a shot, and see what could happen there. But I think he's going to be available on your waiver wire probably for 3 to 4 weeks, even if he's playing well, because a lot of people are just not going to be able to sustain. They're still going to disbelieve the fact that he's playing well. I think his reputation has already been, he's already set a precedent so well, and so many people have been primed by what he's done poorly, that even when they see evidence to the contrary, they're going to have a bias against the guy. And so when it comes to that situation, you can probably make some hay if you have the opportunity to to at least grab him maybe in draft in off the waiver wire early on. But the players to me that I would be looking for is, can DeAndre Smelter get healthy? If he can get healthy, he's a guy you want to look at. But other than that, I would say Vance McDonald, Bruce Ellington, and I would probably pick Ellington before that. And then I would keep an eye out in camp for guys like Blake Bell if Vance McDonald goes down, because Blake Bell is a very smooth guy who looked good in limited time, who I think that can only get better as a player.
And you can only get better as a fantasy football player, as the football fan, joining us here every Thursday night on the Live Audible. You got On the Couch every week. This week, a great session with J.J. Zachariason, fellow Yinzer. And we tipped the cap to Cleveland, but also to Pittsburgh, as it's been a good few weeks for our region, our home region. And, of course, once we get rolling, we're only a month away now from preseason watch list. Me and Cecil going through all 32 teams, everything everyone you need to watch. And then, of course, it'll be the season soon. We get to 8 episodes a week on the Audible. We love to keep you company. You keep us company all season here on the Audible. Again, vacation time coming up soon. I'm going to be out for a few weeks, not starting next week, but the week after that. Cecil's getting his vacation in time. Everyone, rest, relaxation, sun, fun, and everything else. And in the meantime, we will see, and for all of our listeners out there from the UK, the people that are, and I know Kian and other people it's Brexit is Britain and Ireland. Sorry about my geography being behind the times, but I know there's a big vote going down right now as we speak. So it'll be interesting things in the morning. Always interesting things. We get Dr. Gene and Matt and Cecil, who will be back joining us, and always with you joining us here on the Audible. So we appreciate you. We love you because you always stay classy.